January 2022 to observe elections.
그런데 지금 부방대 대원들은 부정선거를 막기 위해서 필사적으로 노력을 한 일로 인해서 상을 받기는커녕 오히려 경찰의 조사를 받고 있습니다. 그리고 선관위가 우리 부방대 대원들을 고발하고 있습니다.
The Election Justice Army had conducted desperate efforts to prevent election fraud. They should have been rewarded for all their endeavors. However, these members are being investigated by the police.
저 역시 이러한 상황을 극복하기 위해서 자유와 혁신이라고 하는 신당을 만들었는데 창당한 지 이틀 만에 부당한 압수수색을 당했습니다.
The Election Commission was prosecuting these good and faithful members, and I too was unjustly subjected to a certain Caesar, just 2 days after establishing a new party, Freedom and Innovation.
부정선거 세력은 부정선거를 방지하기 위해서 시민들의 노력을 편회하고 있습니다. 그리고 선거방해죄로 뒤집어 씌우고 있습니다. 대한민국에서는 중앙선관위를 통제할 수 있는 기관은 그 어느 곳에도 없는 상황이 되어버렸습니다.
The election fraud forces are undermining citizens' effort to prevent fraud and accusing them falsely of election obstruction crimes. In Korea, there is no institution capable of overseeing the National Election Commission at the moment.
이제 6.3 대선 이후의 상황을 간략히 말씀을 드리겠습니다. 대한민국의 입법부 행정부는 이미 반국가 세력에게 장악되었고 사법부마저도 거의 장악될 위기에 처해 있습니다. 사법부를 완전히 장악하기 위해서 이재명과 민주당은 대법원의 숫자를 배로 늘려서 자기들의 마음에 드는 그런 사람들을 대법관으로 세워서 판결함으로써 대법관들을 그런 대법관들을 집어넣으려고 하고 있습니다.
Now, let me briefly describe the situation after the June 3rd presidential election. The legislative and executive branches of Korea have already been seized by the anti-state forces, and even the judiciary appears to be almost under their control. To fully dominate the judiciary, Lee Jae-myung and the Democratic Party are attempting to double the number of Supreme Court justices and fill their seats with those who will rule as they wish.
이는 자유민주주의의 기본인 삼권 분립을 무너뜨리겠다는 것입니다. 사실 이미 삼권 분립이 거의 무너진 상태에 있습니다.
This is an attempt to destroy the separation of powers, the foundation of liberal democracy. In fact, the separation of powers has already nearly collapsed in South Korea.
또한 이재명 정권은 권력자들에 대해서 독립적으로 수사할 수 있는 수사기관인 검찰청을 해체시키고 그 대신에 수사기관을 쪼개가지고 행정부 안에 편입시켜서 정권의 하수인으로 만들려고 하고 있습니다. 이러한 체제는 중국의 체제와 동일한 것으로 알려져 있습니다.
The Lee Jae-myung administration is dismantling the prosecution service, which could independently investigate those in power, and instead dividing investigative agencies and incorporating them into the executive branch to turn them into servants of the regime. This system is known to be identical to that of communist China.
이재명 정권이 추진하고 있는 정부 조직 개편은 공산주의 체제에서 볼 수 있는 일당 독재 체제를 만들기 위한 것으로 보입니다. 그들은 반민주 세력입니다. 그리고 그들은 자신들의 독재의 장애가 되는 자유민주 세력을 하나하나 탄압하고 있습니다.
The government reorganization pursued by the Lee administration appears to aim to create a one-party dictatorship, similar to a communist system. There are anti-democratic forces. They are systematically suppressing liberal democratic forces that hinder their dictatorship.
여기 목사님도 계십니다만은 그들은 이제 교회를 탄압하고 있습니다. 목사들에 대한 압수수색이 진행됐고 또 또 애국 운동을 해온 목사는 구속이 됐습니다. 앞으로 교회에 대한 탄압이 더욱 극심해질 것으로 예상됩니다.
We have pastors here among us. However, there's now persecuting the church in South Korea. Pastors have been raided, and one who led patriotic movements, who is a conservative leader, has even been imprisoned. Persecution of the church is expected to intensify further.
마지막으로 대한민국이 급속히 공산주의 일당 독재 체제로 가고 있는 현 상황에서 우리는 어떻게 해야 할 것인가 이에 대해서 말씀드리겠습니다.
Finally, let me speak about what we must do in this situation where Korea is rapidly heading toward a communist one-party dictatorship.
첫째, 뭉쳐 싸워야 합니다.
First, we must unite and fight together.
다만 아무나 다 뭉치면 안 됩니다. 암덩어리는 빼고 뭉쳐야 합니다. 저는 한국 보수 정당의 대통합을 이루었던 사람입니다. 몸에 암덩어리가 있다면 결국 암이 온 몸으로 퍼져 나가서 회생될 수 밖에 없습니다. 결국 그것이 암덩어리가 되는 것입니다. 그러므로 우리는 똘똘 뭉쳐서 암덩어리는 반드시 잘라내고 대한민국을 이겨내기 위한 힘을 모아야 됩니다. 예를 들어서 보수를 자처하면서도 윤 대통령의 불법 탄핵에 동조했던 정치인들이 있습니다. 그런 사람들과는 함께할 수가 없습니다. 윤 대통령은 즉시 석방되어야 합니다. 그것이 법 정신에도 합당한 일입니다.
First, we must unite and fight together. We cannot unite with just anyone, however. For example, we cannot unite with a cancerous person. We have to cut these people out. I was someone who was able to achieve the grand unification of Korea's conservative parties. However, it is my belief that if there is a cancer cell in the body, it will eventually spread throughout the body and make recovery impossible. Therefore, we must unite together but remove the cancer cells without any hesitation. For example, there are politicians who claim to be conservatives, yet they support the illegal impeachment of President Yoon. We cannot stand together with such people who support his impeachment. President Yoon must be released immediately. That's consistent with the true spirit of law.
둘째, 글로벌 네트워크로 공유하면서 대응을 해야 합니다.
Second, we must share together through global networking.
우파 진영과 정보, 안보, 군사력, 인력 등을 공유해서 공산주의와 맞서 싸워야 합니다. 혼자의 힘으로는 이길 수가 없기 때문입니다. 부정선거 카르텔에 대한 정보 역시 공유하고 전 세계가 연대하여 싸워야 합니다.
We must share information, security, military strength, and manpower to fight against communism. So the conservatives must come together because we cannot win alone. We must also share information about election fraud and also the election fraud cartel to fight together in global solidarity.
이제 우리 우파도 행동해야 합니다. 한국이 공산화의 위기에 직면하게 된 그런 이유는 하루아침에 된 것이 아닙니다. 50년에 걸쳐서 입법, 사법, 행정, 언론 각 분야에 침투한 공산주의 세력이 차근차근 힘을 길러왔는데 이에 대해서 제때 대응하지 못했기 때문에 이런 상황이 되었습니다. 이제는 행동해야 합니다.
Third, we must take action. Korea did not fall into the crisis of communization just overnight. For more than 50 years, communist forces have infiltrated the legislature, judiciary, administration, and media of South Korea, gradually building power. And we failed to respond in time. So we must take action immediately.
지금 우리가 걱정할 시간이 있다면 그 시간에 행동해야 합니다. 지금 한국에서는 많은 청년들과 애국 시민들이 이재명 정권에 저항하고 있습니다. 그들은 법적 처벌을 감수하면서까지 목숨 걸고 싸우고 있습니다. 미국과 전 세계 자유민주주의 세력의 연대와 지지를 부탁드립니다.
If there's time to worry now, we must instead use that time to take actions. Right now, many young people and patriotic citizens in Korea are resisting the Lee Jae-myung government. They are risking their lives, facing legal punishment to fight. We ask for the solidarity and support of America and freedom-loving democratic people worldwide.
넷째, 한미 동맹을 더욱 강화해야 합니다. 이재명과 민주당은 철저한 반미 친중 세력입니다. 그러나 대부분의 한국 국민들은 한미 동맹의 중요성을 잘 알고 있습니다. 굳건한 한미 동맹의 강화를 바라고 있습니다. 따라서 이재명 정권의 뜻과 일반 국민들의 뜻이 같지 않다는 점을 기억해 주시기를 바랍니다. 만일 이재명이 주한미군 철수나 전시작전권 환수를 언급한다면 하더라도 일반 국민들의 뜻은 그와는 전혀 다르다는 것을 말씀을 드립니다.
Fourth, the Korea-US alliance must be strengthened further. Lee Jae-myung and the Democratic Party are thoroughly anti-American and pro-Chinese. However, the majority of Koreans clearly understand the importance of the US-Korean alliances and desire this alliance to be stronger than ever. So please remember that the will of the Lee administration is not the same. It is different from the will of the Korean people.
다섯째, 마지막입니다. 그러나 이것이 가장 중요하다고 말씀을 드립니다.
Even if Lee Jae-myung speaks of withdrawing U.S. forces from Korea or claiming wartime operational control, the will of the people is entirely different.
우리들의 간절한 기도가 필요합니다.
Fifth, this is the most important point. We need to pray together earnestly. We need earnest prayer.
탄압 위기에 직면한 저와 한국의 크리스천들은 날마다 하나님의 은혜와 긍휼을 구하면서 기도하고 있습니다. 자유 대한민국을 사용해 주시기를 기도하고 있습니다. 미국에 계신 크리스천들께서도 한국을 기억하고 또 기도해 주시면 고맙겠습니다. 간곡히 부탁의 말씀을 드립니다. 감사합니다.
Faced with persecution, Christians and I in Korea are praying every day for God's grace and mercy. We're praying that God will continue to use the Free Republic of Korea. We ask Christians in the United States to also remember Korea and pray for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister Hawk, for that excellent keynote speech preceded by the great welcome remarks by Associate Director Haas. We will now go directly into the panel session moderated by the excellent, best moderator that I know of, Colonel Grant Newsham, featuring just tremendously awesome, great bunch of panelists. So I'm looking very much forward to that. So, Grant.
Yes, definitely the best moderation that I know of too. So, I'm glad to be here, and particularly glad to have all of you come. This is really the best place to have an event like this. This museum is a reminder of what happens when communists or communist-inspired hardcore radicals take over a society, and the damage they do in their effort to create a utopia. It's always washed in blood. And that is the reminder that this place just is so good at showing us. But I was told, and I remember, that in 1989, supposedly communism was defeated. Mm-hmm. Never supposed to come back. But what you find is it's not even history. It's certainly not old history. And even today, that you have right before our eyes, you are seeing an effort by communist-inspired or outright communist, to take over a country, and that is South Korea. And thus the need to constantly expose, to educate, and explain what is going on, what they are doing. They thrive when nobody's paying attention to that. And myself, I've probably spent 45 years looking at South Korea. I've been aware of it, and I knew that there was always, in part of Korean society and the political world, there were people who were anti-American and were pro-North Korea, of all things. I knew they existed, but I didn't realize just how much influence they had. And then in 2020, I actually had occasion to have a very close look at this. And really to my surprise, if not horror, I saw that what we were seeing in South Korea is a systematic effort by committed radicals to turn Korea into a one-party state, just as Prime Minister Hwang just said, and to make South Korea aligned with China, aligned with North Korea, and to ultimately cut the alliance with the United States. And see, I was looking at South Korea for almost 4 decades, and I didn't know this. But I've seen it, and the evidence is clear. Now you might say, well, this is unthinkable, because everyone knows the US-South Korea alliance is so strong, we know that Koreans like us, it's just impossible. Well, it's not. And what I would point to is another example of a country that was once a very strong US ally, maybe our strongest ally in Latin America. It was democratic, pro-America, and now it is the opposite. It is a dictatorship, and it is one of America's enemies, and that's Venezuela. So what we have today is we have some experts we've brought in, including some brave South Koreans who are on the front lines trying to prevent this communist leftist takeover in South Korea, trying to prevent the destruction of democracy and consensual government. And we also have some other experts as well, regional experts, and particularly we have a Venezuela expert, a Latin America expert as well, who's going to explain things. And the audience can make their own determinations. But what we're doing here is to educate. So what I'd like to do is to give each of the speakers a chance to make some brief remarks, and then we will have a moderated discussion, followed by the opportunity to ask questions as well and delve into particular topics. So first I would like Bart Marquardt to speak. And Bart is a former Foreign Service officer with a lot of experience in East Asia and other parts of the world. He was also I want to get the title right, because he's always confusing. He was the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Energy for International Affairs. And he knows what's going on in the world. He's widely published. He's sought after as a commentator in the media, and he's also a successful investor as well. And I've heard him speak about South Korea, and I think you will enjoy it as well and find it informative. So, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. I'll try to make my remarks brief, which is uncharacteristic for me. I want to talk today about patterns. My wife likes to sew. She sews beautiful, beautiful things. When we first got married, she made many of her own clothes. She would see something on the cover of Vogue and she would say, I can make that. She'd go out, she'd buy a pattern. And when she was done, it looked exactly like, because she was a gifted executioner and she had a pattern. Now she makes her own patterns and she only sews for our grandchildren, and she does other kinds of things. But recognizing a pattern is a tremendous skill, and I'm good at recognizing political patterns. I'm not an expert on South Korea. I've not followed it for 45 years. I've followed it as a generalist. I'm aware of it. I have family members who served there. I've written a great deal about it in the first Trump administration, but I don't know it intimately. But what I do know intimately is communism. I've studied communism. If you go to my X account, the first words in my X bio are old Cold Warrior. I have been a Cold Warrior since childhood. I've been fighting the Cold War, I've been fighting Marxism, and I see the pattern. Let me read off some of the elements of the pattern you see when there is a Marxist or communist takeover of a country. You see election fraud. You see repression of churches, repression of opposition parties, repression of the media, getting the media to change stories. Have we seen that in the last 48 hours? You see the corruption of prosecutors, the appointment of corrupt prosecutors. You see installation of special courts, removal of judges and court packing. You see the imprisonment of opposition political leaders. You see attempts to shut down opposition political parties. You see, as George Orwell so brilliantly described in his little book, Animal Farm, you see sheep repeating mindlessly slogans and ideas to drown out independent thought. And you see an attempt to introduce division in society, and especially division among your opposition parties and among the people opposed to you. All these things go back more than 100 years. It's Vladimir Lenin who first came up with this pattern, and it has been followed rigorously and almost without exception, I don't know how many hundreds of times over the years. I wrote an article 5 or 6 years ago called 100 Years, 100 Million Victims, talking about the victims of communism. I'm so grateful to be in this building. Everything I said, I saw you nodding your heads. You've recognized this pattern. It is plain to see. As I said a couple of days ago, when somebody questions whether or not your election was legitimate or fraudulent, that if you won legitimately, what you do is you open the books, you open a transparent investigation, you invite in the doubters, and you invite in international media, international observers and international experts, and you say, look at the evidence, did we or did we not win? And while you're doing this, you appeal to the people and you say, we won, didn't we? And if you won, the majority of the people will say, yes, we won. This was a legitimate election. What you do if you lose, what you do if you, or if it was fraudulent, what you do if it was fraudulent is you make it illegal to say the election was stolen. You arrest people for even daring to go to the airport to meet with somebody who has called into question the election. You challenge, you try to arrest, you arrest the former president. What they're doing to President Yoon is shocking, and how the rest of the world can remain silent shocks my conscience, and it shocks my moral, it provokes moral outrage. You have a man who is in prison and denied medication and denied medical treatment, and his wife and so many people around him. Prime Minister Huang went through the list. That's what you do if you've cheated, because you know that the mass of the people are not on your side. You know that the mass of the people voted against you, and so you institute repression instead. And the number one thing you repress, and this goes back before Lenin, he was the organizational genius. This goes back to Karl Marx. What do you repress first? What do you shut down first? Religion. You shut down the worship of God, because for the communists, God is the state, and the state is God. They want no interference, no loyalty to anyone but the state. And so they demand absolute loyalty. And they must stamp out faith in God. I'd like to echo the words, the call of my friend and brother here. two things I beg you to do. Pray without ceasing, pray without stopping, and be united. Because another Leninist tactic is to insert provocateurs into your ranks to make you fight each other. And if somebody is trying to make you fight, either get that person to stop or unite with everybody around that, away from that person. Just walk around them and unite. Do not let yourselves be divided. Be united in your opposition. And I'll end my remarks there.
Thanks very much, Bart. That was insightful. And as you noted, it really is a pattern that when you know what you're looking for, it's easy to see the actually approach that these people take to take over every lever of power in a society and gradually snuff out opposition. And this was, I hope people pay close attention to what you just heard. Now, the next speaker is one of the most influential political podcasters in South Korea. And I guess everyone knows who he is, but it's Paul Sung-Hwan Kim. And his podcast is called Group C, or Ground C, which is Ground of Conservatism. And he performs a very valuable educational role, particularly in educating sort of younger Koreans about history, about consensual government, liberal democracy, conservatism, and also he's also a board member of the Committee for North Korea Holocaust Memorial Museum, which gives you some idea of his commitment to human rights and freedom. So thanks very much, Paul.
Thank you. My beloved Americans and all the brothers and sisters and teachers, today, thank you so much for your time and paying attention to our listen to our story. 2 days ago, sorry, my throat is getting dry. I'll try my best. 2 days ago, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, appeared on Fox News, stating that South Korea is sliding into pro-China socialist dictatorship. This is a really big alarming sound to the world and the US and Americans and all the people who believe in the God-given right. So Newt Gingrich also said that the reason why Charlie Kirk visited South Korea before he was assassinated is because he was trying to help South Koreans who were persecuted under this government. This is a really important story to all of us, I believe. So I'm going to share really important the situation in Korea. 2 months ago, thankfully and unfortunately, President Trump said that in his Truth Social SNS, he said that what's going on in South Korea? It seems like purge or revolution is going on in South Korea. We can't do business in that country. So I'm gonna share more specific cases in detail. Thankfully, President Trump, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, and respected Ambassador Horst Tenure, and Marukoyer, and Dr. Gordon Chang, and Ambassador Kolasec, they have all spoken out regarding the persecution of religious community in Korea. This is really important. First thing I want to share is that really important figures, and they are famously known in Korea and US. They are Billy Kim. He is known for translator of Billy Graham. He is really a legendary figure in US too and in Korea too. And he is under investigation now. And Lee Young-Poon, he is the pastor of the Yeouido Full Gospel Church with more than 600,000 members in the church. And they are under investigation under this government. And the pastor's son, he was arrested 3 weeks ago. The prosecution office accused him of openly and publicly advocating one conservative candidate. This is ridiculous. So religious persecution is going on in South Korea. And the second thing I want to share is that civilians, innocent citizens, even like me, are a target of the Lee's government. They are all standing up against the misdeeds of the Lee's government and crimes of the Lee's government. So in Korea, there is a trilateral triangle structure to suppress civilians. The one thing is the Lee's government, and on the other side, they are using media, left-leaning media. And on the other side, they are using Democratic Party of Korea. So these triangle structure are crazily hunting people who are who raise up their voice against the Lee's government. So as Ambassador Norstand stated, this is clear evidence of communization of Korea right now. So I want to know about this. Just remember that U.S.-Korea alliance was, of course, built along the blood-forged history. But just remember that our alliance, Great Alliance, started from the fight that we fought against the evil enemies who were hunted by communism. So this is not a diplomatic issue. This is an international issue. If South Korea fell into hands of communists, you're going to see a domino effect in East Asia. As of September 2025, Lai Ching-te, the president of Taiwan, he has faced right now a price of impeachment, like President Yoon. So pro-China party in Taiwan is called Kumin Party. This is this party in collusion with CCP, like Democratic Party of Korea is in collusion with CCP. So, and if you look at the Philippine situation, the president Marcos, he is a pro-US, but he has now similar crisis because he has lost recent election, you know. So pro-China lawmakers and pro-China forces in Philippines are trying to take President Marcos out of his office right now. So if you see these parallels, this is the international issue, and this is related to national interest of the United States. So like Newt Gingrich stated 2 years ago, U.S. government should press the government to stop persecuting. And Donald Trump will visit Korea in late October for APEC, and I urge President Trump to insist that the government should stop persecuting. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Paul. That was an excellent explanation of and reminder of the religious persecution that is part of the effort to take over total control in South Korea. Additionally, what you touched on was the targeting of opponents, to anyone who is seen as opposition. And it's the usual tools that these kind of regimes use to make life miserable for people. And I would really once again stress the courage of the people that are sitting up here, who've had the nerve to take on this administration, this regime, and it's not easy to do. Additionally, you also mentioned that what you're seeing in South Korea resembles what you see in other places. It's the patterns that Bart talked about. And ultimately, this is certainly part of a larger Chinese political warfare effort to subvert free societies in Asia and elsewhere. Now, our next speaker really is, I would say, the attorney defending liberal democracy and exposing election fraud in South Korea. And once again, he's doing it at great personal expense and personal risk. And this is attorney Park Ju-hyung. And he is the president of the Association of Free Lawyers, but he's the one who really has catalyzed a lot of this youth movement, this in support of liberal democracy. He's a former inspector in the office of the special inspector in the Blue House, and that's South Korea's White House. And he was a policy aide in the office of the National Assembly's vice speaker, and has been an advisor to the National Police Agency and the Ministry of Defense. So we're fortunate to have Attorney Park here to speak with us for a bit.
I sincerely thank you for being here today to address the pressing issues confronting Korea. Today, I want to talk about the international election fraud cartel connecting Venezuela, China, and Korea. And the crisis it has created not only for Korea, but for the whole world. Venezuela has already fallen into election fraud, drugs, and crime. It became a center for international criminal cartels. This problem did not stay in one country. The election fraud and crime spread to China and then to Korea. Recently, with the help of the US FBI, a large drug group was caught in Gangnam, Korea. This shows that the criminal network that started in Venezuela has now reached Korea. When a nation takes an anti-American path, it becomes impoverished, crime increases, and the country even turns into a criminal state. Yet the regime still holds onto power. The reason is simple: election fraud. After Hugo Chavez came to power, Venezuela lost its democracy step by step through election fraud. Under Nicolas Maduro, it became a full dictatorship. Electronic voting systems like the smart betting and Dominion were used as tools of fraud. The Venezuelan government used many ticket tricks together: fake ballots, fake voter register, first only voting observers, spreading false news, and using courts and prosecutors for control. China worked closely with Venezuela and made this fraud system more organized and advanced. Maduro even held a Huawei phone and said, "China Shushu," showing his close tie with Beijing. Now, similar things are happening in Korea. Candidate Lee Jae-myung was said China Shushu in his campaign. He also bowed very deeply to the Chinese ambassador. Former Chinese ambassador Xing Haimin even warned that young Koreans who had a memorial for child girl should be punished. Later, Bank President Lee Jae-myung said in a government meeting that those youths should not just be won, and the police began to investigate them. This shows Korea is becoming a country under China's orders. On October 10th, 2023, Korea's National Intelligence Service found many problems in the election system: ballot forgery, hacking, duplicate, and false voting, changes in computer vote counts, and even the use of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Chinese service hotline as the password for Korean election system. President Yoon Suk-yeol also said in public statement that there was a possibility of election fraud, but instead of fixing it, the fraud cartel impeached President Yoon and used fraud in the June 3rd election to create a fake president. This is not just the normal politics. This is deep crisis shaking the foundation of Korea's free democracy. Power was swallowed without guns and without blood. If Korea becomes the best state of China, then the sacrifice of young Americans in the Korean War 75 years ago will be in vain. There were no child of that time. If Americans ignored this, then Charikov's sacrifice will also be in vain. If this election fraud cartel keeps growing, it will also damage the world order. Broad leaders, bank presidents, and bank prime ministers could take power in many countries and control the UN and other groups. Then the United States will become isolated, and freedom will not spread. Just yesterday, at the UN in New York, where President Trump gave his speech, strange technical problems happened. This is a sign. If America wants to keep world leadership, it must stop the global election fraud cartel. Korea's election commission even exported fraud systems and voting machines to possible island nation through AI. This is danger for the future. If a war happened between the US and China, pro-China countries in the Pacific could block the US forces. But the Korean people are ready to wake up, together with America. They can defeat this cartel. If America speaks out about Korea's fake president, Lee Jae-myung, and election fraud, the Korean people will rise. The Lee Jae-myung regime has no legality or legitimacy. Its repression is extreme. Both President Yoon Suk-yeol and First Lady Kim Gon-hee were jailed. This has never happened before in the world history. Students who remember the Charlie Court are now shouting, "Free Yoon." This shows how dangerous dictatorship through election fraud is. If the United States and the world act now, we can stop Korea from becoming another Venezuela. Korea is the front line of freedom and the shoulder of democracy. If we stay awake and raise our voices, we can block this global cartel and protect freedom in Korea and the world. Ladies and gentlemen, the last country Charlie Kirk visited was Korea. Korea was the nation he cared for. We fought against election fraud. He fought against election fraud. And his sacrifices is waking up us. America, please stand with Korea and protect its freedom. We work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Attorney Park. Attorney Park really he's a lawyer, and lawyers operate based on evidence. And since at least 2020 that I know of, Attorney Park has been behind a very successful effort to produce evidence, memorialize it, and to put it out for examination. Additionally, Prime Minister Huang's group has done the same work. To produce the evidence, as I said, and put it out. And election fraud, when we talk about it, it's really a means to an end for leftist communist takeovers. And once you have the electoral system, you get your people in power, and nobody can do anything about it. But the evidence is there. And one thing I would note is that nobody has ever challenged it on a point-by-point basis or at all. You would think if it was not true that somebody would have done something. The government that's being accused of election fraud would have done something. They've done nothing. And that tells you a lot. Additionally, I would just highlight one point that Attorney Park mentioned. And this is that in 2020, one of the allegations is that there has been hacking and electronic manipulation of South Korea's voting system. And this was always dismissed as baseless, debunked conspiracy theories. However, in 2023, the National Intelligence Service had the opportunity to investigate South Korea's electoral network. And the reason they had the opportunity is because it was revealed that North Korea's Lazarus group of hackers had been inside the system repeatedly. So the NIS, the intelligence service, looked at it, and they discovered that you can do anything you want. The system is basically entirely open. You can change votes, change registration, anything. And they've issued their report. The report is public, and this is after many years of people assuring everyone the system cannot be hacked. There's nothing to worry about. Yet the National Intelligence Service gets its chance and exposes this. The other point that is worth mentioning is that after President Yoon was impeached and imprisoned, that actually his popularity skyrocketed once people realized what had happened and that this was an effort to unfairly remove him and replace him really with leftists in power. And additionally, large part of the protests, the people trying to defend consensual government in South Korea are actually young people. So when you go to the rallies, that is one of the biggest, most surprising things. It's not a lot of older people, but it is really a youth-driven movement. And those are things which give a sense of the situation in South Korea and how it's regarded by many South Koreans. Now, I'd like to move along to the next speaker, and I've really been looking forward to this one. This is Jeff Ramsey from the Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. He's coming up on 2 decades at least of experience in Latin America, on Latin American issues, topics involving democracy, human rights, rule of law, and political risk, particularly in countries like Venezuela and Colombia. He too is a frequent contributor to the media, is often sought out for interviews as well, and he's going to really educate us on Venezuela as well in more detail than most of us know. So thanks very much, Jeff.
Thank you so much. Good morning. So my name is Jeff Ramsey. I'm a senior fellow at the Adrian Arsh Latin America Center at the Atlantic Council. I just want to thank the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation and the Korea Conservative Political Action Committee for inviting me today. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for your remarks. It's a real pleasure to be on this panel with so many distinguished speakers. Before I start, I just want to be very clear. I am not an expert on South Korea, and I'm not going to be able to speak about that country's political system. Looking around the room, I think I'm probably the least qualified person to talk about South Korea, so I will leave that to my other panelists and to all of you. I really can make no statement about the situation inside South Korea. I also want to say, for those of you who would like to learn more about the Atlantic Council's fantastic work on South Korea or on the U.S.-South Korea security relationship, I invite you to follow the work of our Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security or our Indo-Pacific Security Initiative. They do fantastic work. Instead, I was invited to speak to you all today about Venezuela. I've been working on and tracking Venezuela for over 10 years now, I like to think that I've become something of an expert in how it went from one of Latin America's most stable democracies to the authoritarian regime that we see today. I think that it's an important story with lessons for any democracy, including our own, which underscores just how fragile democratic governance can be if it's not preserved and defended. It's hard to believe now, but in the 1990s, Venezuela was considered one of the most healthy democracies in South America. It was widely seen as a solid U.S. ally. It had enjoyed uninterrupted democratic elections since 1958. It was a founding member of OPEC, and it was one of Washington's closest partners. But beneath this stability, the country faced real deep structural problems. Income inequality was among the worst in the hemisphere. Poverty was rising after an oil bust, and ordinary Venezuelans felt that the two dominant parties, the center-left Democratic Action Party and the center-right COPE party, were unable to deliver. Politics as usual in Venezuela wasn't working. This frustration paved the way for Hugo Chavez. In 1992, he was a little-known lieutenant colonel who led a failed coup. Just 6 years later, in 1998, he campaigned as an outsider, promising massive anti-systemic change, and he won the presidency with 56% of the vote. At first, Chavez was very popular. He pushed through a new constitution in 1999 that expanded presidential powers. But by 2002, his approval ratings started to fall, and they fell to around 30%. And in April of that year, after a wave of protests and a violent crackdown, he was briefly ousted in a coup, only to return to power in 48 hours. After that, Chavez moved very quickly to go after his opponents. He packed the Supreme Court, targeted independent media, and he used state resources to tilt the playing field in favor of his ruling party. At the same time, oil prices in Venezuela were soaring. Oil prices worldwide were soaring. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. So with billions of dollars in revenue from the oil sector, he expanded subsidies and implemented vast social programs known as misiones, all of which helped the poor restore his popularity. We saw this evidence in the fact that in 2004 he won a recall referendum with nearly 59% of the vote. In 2006 he won re-election handily with 63% of the vote. But in 2007 he lost a referendum that sought to abolish term limits. This was the first major electoral setback of his presidency. And this is where we really started to see what was at stake in Venezuela. We saw that instead of accepting the result, Chavez pushed the same reforms again in 2009, just 2 years later. And this time he won, and he eliminated term limits. And this was a clear indicator of how authoritarian he was becoming. In 2012, even as his health was failing, he still won another term with 55% of the vote. When he died in March 2013, his successor, Nicolás Maduro, ran for and narrowly won the presidency. But Maduro lacked Chavez's charisma. He didn't have the same oil boom to rely on. The economy began to collapse, shortages spread, and inflation soared. Maduro's response to this was not reform, but repression. In 2014, student-led protests were brutally suppressed. In 2015, the opposition won a 2/3 majority of the seats in the legislature and the National Assembly. This was the first time in 16 years that they held a legislative majority. And instead of respecting those results, Maduro used the Supreme Court to invalidate that opposition majority, and then a few years later he created a separate body, a constituent assembly, to bypass the legislature altogether. From that point on, and still to this day, Venezuela has had no meaningful separation of powers. Presidential elections in 2018 were widely denounced as unfair, and again, just last year in 2024, the international community and the opposition documented widespread irregularities in that vote. In last year's presidential election, the official vote tally sheets that were gathered and presented by the opposition suggest that the opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, won more than twice as many votes as Maduro. We've seen subsequent regional and local elections since then, which have been very far from free and fair. Nevertheless, today, Maduro firmly holds the reins of power by controlling the security forces, the intelligence apparatus, the courts, the legislature, the majority of local and regional seats, and the entire electoral system itself. What began as a promise of radical democracy has hardened into authoritarianism. So that's it for the history lesson. But what I'd love to do is close with just two important points here. The first is that the Venezuelan people and the opposition in Venezuela have not taken this slide into authoritarianism sitting down. There have been really important demonstrations of popular will in Venezuela against authoritarianism. We've seen mass protests in 2007, 2013, 2014, 2017, 2019, and just last year in 2024. The opposition has worked in the international space to document and denounce Venezuela's government and its slide into authoritarianism. And they've really worked hard, especially with the leadership of Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, to demonstrate that the government lacks a popular mandate and that the opposition remains very popular. And they've done so in a way that I think is really important. They worked hard to build a big tent. Venezuela's opposition coalition is a wide ideological spectrum, and Maria Corina Machado has made very clear that opposing authoritarianism and dictatorship in Venezuela is not about a left-right divide. Her coalition includes the far left, and it includes members includes social democrats, Christian democrats, and conservatives. What she's trying to make clear is that opposing dictatorship is not a left-right issue, and that really the focus needs to be on restoring Venezuelan democracy. And I think it's really important that the opposition has done this, and I think it's a sign that they've played their cards really well. And it's one reason why Maria Corina Machado remains the most popular politician in Venezuela today. The second point is that the United States really appears to have limited tools with respect to Venezuela. And increasingly, the United States is recognizing other U.S. priorities in addition to the need to advance democracy and human rights. This started under former President Biden, but has continued in the administration of current President Trump, which has taken a two-pronged approach. On the one hand, we see ramping up military pressure, we see a U.S. naval deployment in the Caribbean, but it must be said we've also seen this administration lift sanctions on Venezuela and try to carve out space for U.S. energy companies to work in Venezuela. And at the same time, the administration has negotiated with the Maduro regime to ensure their cooperation on twice-weekly deportation flights. Meanwhile, we've seen that the world of democracy promotion is changing. USAID funding for independent civil society has been ended. And I think the lesson in this is that those of us who care about democracy, not only in Venezuela, but all around the world, operate in a new environment where we have to make the case for democracy promotion in terms, not just in terms of values, but in terms of U.S. interests. In Venezuela, that's security interests, migration interests, and energy interests. To her credit, Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, has recognized this new reality, and she's talking about Venezuela as a $1 trillion opportunity for U.S. investment. And I say this not because the United States no longer cares about democracy. I say this because I think President Trump and Secretary Rubio have been very clear that their mission is to make the United States safer, stronger, and more prosperous. And so I think all of us who care about democracy promotion anywhere in the globe need to think about how our work to promote democracy fits in with the new priorities of the United States as we think about this new approach. And I'll close with this. I think the story of Venezuela is a warning. I think democratic decline rarely happens overnight. It creeps forward through inequality, disillusionment, leaders who claim that they alone embody the will of the people. And I think if it can happen in Venezuela, which as we've heard was for many years a strong U.S. ally, a healthy liberal democracy, I think it can happen anywhere. And I think we should all be mindful of the need to protect our democracies and learn these lessons from Venezuela. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all.
Thank you, Jeff. That was fascinating and informative. You certainly laid it out very clearly, particularly how you see an opening for a certain type of person, regime, to get in, insinuate themselves, and ultimately take over, targeting the courts, the media, the legislature, the security services, the police or the army, and also targeting your opponents, making life miserable for them, are all patterns of the sort that Marc Marquardt described in his in his opening statement. And particularly, there's a couple other points. That one is so important is that, as Machado said, this is not a left-right issue in any of these places, but rather it's a question of liberal democracy, consensual government. And that is a key point to keep in mind about it. But also, he described as sort of a wild card in these situations, particularly where the communist hardcore radicals try to take over, and that's the public, the population. And there's a lot of people who don't want what they're selling, and they are able to respond or defend themselves to greater or lesser success. But you see that in Venezuela, but you also see it in South Korea, where most people don't want what the Lee Jae-myung and the hardcore leftists want, to move South Korea into a place like China, like North Korea. And that is something that causes them great concern. And they don't quite know how to deal with it. But it is a wild card, and it is one of the advantages that South Korea has, just like Venezuela had. So thank you very much. That was an education. And so you can learn the lessons from Venezuela and apply them to South Korea and elsewhere as well. So our final speaker, batting cleanup, is Ambassador Morse Tan. He's the vice chairman of chairman of KCPAC USA. He was during the first Trump administration, he was the ambassador at large for global criminal justice at the Department of State. And in that role, he was very energetic in trying to stop genocide, war crimes, the crimes against humanity. And he has also become a real sort of advocate for electoral integrity. And once again, at some considerable personal risk, he has been pushing that issue, promoting it. He's a sort of a lawyer, he's a legal scholar, he's been a law professor, and even the dean of a law school. So he's done just about everything. So Morse.
Good to see you all. Picture this: 2 tracks, 2 trains. One train led by China, the Chinese Communist Party, with Russia and Venezuela and Iran and maybe Brazil and North Korea in tow. That along this track they are trying to take the world over a cliff. That is where that track leads. And then picture with me another track. This is the US-led track, the track of liberty, of freedom, of free markets, free societies, of constitutional republics, of prosperity, of peace. And you have so much of the free world attached to this train that is heading towards prosperity and peace and freedom, democracy, things along these lines. Now consider this. South Korea, which had been on the US train, hitched together, tied together by blood, fire, and steel, is now in real danger of getting off of this track and getting onto this track, heading off the cliff of communist dictatorship and destruction of the society in terms of its systems, in terms of democracy, in terms of free markets, in terms of freedoms and rights that are so fundamental and basic to a constitutional republic. And there is a real danger that the South Korea car will be shifting tracks to be heading off of that cliff. The Chinese Communist Party is playing for keeps, and they are playing for world domination. While there are shooting wars in the Middle East and in Russia, Ukraine, there is a worldwide hybrid war where the Chinese Communist Party is trying to garner more power and influence around the world. The last thing that I was able to be involved in the first Trump administration was the determination for genocide and crimes against humanity by the Chinese Communist Party in Xinjiang province against the Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities in that place. And what were they doing? They were flooding Xinjiang province with Han Chinese communist ethno-nationalists who were inserted and flooding Xinjiang, being put into the homes of the people there, flooding that place to take it over. Meanwhile, all sorts of birth control and abortive sorts of things were happening to decrease the population in Xinjiang so that there could be this Han Chinese communist ethno-nationalist takeover of Xinjiang while they were persecuting the people inside of Xinjiang province. If the US does not address this decoupling of Korea from one set of tracks to the other, we may face World War III. When Winston Churchill warned of the threats of the Nazi government in Germany, which was the National Socialist Party, I might add, he was denounced as a warmonger. He was denounced as somebody who was going to plunge Great Britain into war. And his warnings, for the most part, went unheeded. When Neville Chamberlain went to Germany to negotiate peace with Adolf Hitler while Hitler was arming for war, he came home to Great Britain as a hero, that he was the champion of peace. In fact, he said that he had won peace in our time. Now, in the retrospect of history, Churchill, who fought against the Nazi regime when they were waging a war against Europe and taking over Europe, and in the Battle of Britain, he was the hero who was rallying Britain to fight the forces of evil coming from Nazi Germany. Neville Chamberlain, who represented appeasement and a false peace, is now largely recognized as somebody who did not see his times clearly and failed miserably in bringing peace in the name of peace. Now, in South Korea, picture this situation happening because this is a real possibility, a real possibility. As South Korea is being transformed into a communist dictatorship with all that that entails, and as we've heard along these lines, if the Chinese Communist Party seeks to seize Taiwan by force, the Lee Jae-myung government in South Korea will not come to the aid of Taiwan. And the Korean War has not ended. The Korean War is still on, and North Korea can anytime come down across the 38th parallel and concurrently take over South Korea. Is that not World War III then? Russia-Ukraine is dragging on. The Middle East has been on fire. And if the Chinese Communist Party is waiting for the fall and turning of South Korea as the final domino before they make their move on Taiwan, folks, we are in World War III. Much better is an ounce of prevention than a pound of cure. Before the shooting starts in Taiwan, before the shooting starts on the Korean Peninsula, how much better would it be to address the crisis in South Korea, keep South Korea coupled with the US, and not going off the cliff with the Chinese Communist Party and the evil train that they are creating there. It would be much better to prevent that train wreck from happening than to watch it happen. South Korea, by many objective measures, is the best ally of the United States. I do not only speak of the love of the South Korean people for the United States. I do not only speak of the important military alliance memorialized in the Mutual Defense Treaty that has been in place for a long time. I do not only speak of the close business relationship and the economic ties and relation. I do not only speak of the cultural ties that are extensive, the educational ties that are extensive. I do not only speak of the systems that the U.S. planted in South Korea that has enabled to flourish and to be a beacon of light as contrasted with North Korea. I'm also talking about the 5th largest military in the world, in South Korea, facing off with the 4th largest military in the world, which is North Korea. And not only that, the involvement of the 3 largest militaries in the world, namely the US, China, and Russia. The US needs South Korea to be a bulwark to prevent World War III. Who fought alongside Americans, not only, of course, in the Korean War, but in the Vietnam War, but also in Iraq, also in Afghanistan? You think those were Canadians? Canada is sitting there saying, and taking as an insult that, we're not the 51st US state. I've heard South Koreans who say, please, rather than becoming a communist dictatorship, we'd rather be the 51st US state. I've heard that from a bunch of Koreans. If this linchpin ally is allowed to fall, it is like pulling the pin of the grenade of the most important region right now, geopolitically and strategically for the United States of America. And you will see an explosion that will rock the world. Would that our leadership would increasingly see that before we are plunged into World War III. There was a memorial service for the Christian martyr and American hero Charlie Kirk recently. Millions of people all around the world and across the United States have watched this. Charlie Kirk was going to brief Secretary of State Marco Rubio about the unfolding crisis in South Korea, the last place he went outside the United States before he was gunned down. If he had a chance to share with Secretary Rubio, I believe he would have said a lot of the things that have been shared on this panel. He would have informed Secretary Rubio of the religious persecution against Christian churches that are being raided and pastors that are being jailed. He would have shared about the collapsing constitutional republic of Korea. He would have shared the rise of this communist dictatorship in South Korea. And now the young people in South Korea are saying, we are Charlie Kirk. They are elevating their voices. They are seeking to wake up the country and the world to what is happening on the front line of democracy and freedom in the world, which runs through South Korea. Eminent voices in the United States are increasingly joining their voices together to wake up America and American leadership as to what is going on. This is not the time for a false complacence. This is not a time to stay neutral. This is not a time to hold back. Do you want stability? Do you want peace? Then now is the time to intervene in regards to South Korea. Let me give some particulars here. Lee Jae-myung came to put on a show with President Trump. He was completely false, he was completely fake, and he is not to be trusted. The man is marinated in lies. So when there was this agreement for South Korea to invest $350 billion in the United States of America, he never came with the intention of actually fulfilling that. And indeed, as expected, he went back to Korea and said, oh, this would throw South Korea into a financial crisis, the likes of the IMF era of South Korea, so we cannot afford to give that money and to invest that money in the United States. Oh, very conveniently using the Hyundai, the LG Energy Solution raid in Georgia as also a further pretext to stoke anti-American sentiment in South Korea, stabbing President Trump in the back right after putting on the show as if he was going to do all these things for America. That's the cold reality of what is going on. But also, consider this. He could come up with 250 million of that 350 million if he merely decided to divert 3 places of funding, 100 billion going to leftist organizations inside of South Korea. Why should that go there? Over 100 billion going to offshore wind power and solar power equipment going to the Chinese Communist Party. And finally, over 50 billion in cash reserves that Korea has. He can do 250 billion just by diverting money from those 3 sources. But instead, he is actively decoupling South Korea from the US train to the Chinese Communist Party train, and the country is going off of a cliff. The sooner that is recognized, the sooner that is realized, the sooner that the righteous might of the United States of America can intervene for its most precious ally in the world, South Korea, the better. The US is not helpless. Indeed, the FBI was involved in a huge drug bust in South Korea. It's the US Navy that is blowing up drug boats emerging out of Venezuela. Maduro probably feels a good bit of stress right now. Just as Kim Jong-un of North Korea was terrified to see the US bunker busters going into Iranian bunkers to destroy the nuclear program of Iran. Kim Jong-un has nowhere underground he can hide anymore, and he saw it graphically. Do not wait for the communization of South Korea to become full-fledged, and for the unification of Korea to be a communist unification under the Chinese Communist Party and North Korea. Do not wait until that day. Then, the US security posture and geopolitical and strategic interests will be severely compromised, and the US will have a much harder fight on its hands to lead and to save the free world. I believe the US leadership And the US people are starting to wake up, starting to understand more of these things. And as Charlie Kirk said in his last message abroad in South Korea, that if he knows the United States, that he will see the righteous might of the United States employed to build up and to save South Korea in this time of crisis, in this time of great danger. It is time. And as the Korean patriots are gasping for air, as they are being choked and poisoned and destroyed, it is time for the US not only to intervene against the present regime, but also to protect the patriots and the American-loving people of South Korea and its noble leadership, including those who are represented here on this panel. We need a white list of at least 1,200 of the leaders of South Korea who Lee Jae-myung has vowed to root out falsely as insurrectionists when he is the insurrectionist. And we also need sanctions. Why not sanctions like in Brazil, where Brazilian Supreme Court justices were sanctioned in the midst of the persecution of President Bolsonaro, in the midst of election fraud in Brazil? I believe President Trump knows what it is to be hounded through lawfare, to be persecuted politically, to be attempted to be assassinated even. And if the US knows what is happening to the rightful President Yoon, how is it any different from the sorts of things that have been happening to people like Bolsonaro and President Trump himself? Visa sanctions, economic sanctions relating to a coup d'etat. These are all among some of the initial tools that can be used with respect to the Korean situation. Note, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Korea is being attacked and pressured as we speak to keep Lee Jae-myung from being prosecuted. If one of those criminal cases against Lee Jae-myung is able to go through and you have an honest, upright court and judge who is able to uphold that, that could be the end of the Lee Jae-myung administration. These judges need to be protected so that a free, independent judiciary in South Korea can be allowed to protect the country from this destruction. Korea is a reflection and the image of the goodness and greatness of the United States of America. Are we going to let them fall? Are we going to sit on the sidelines in this time of the crisis and great need? I've seen it firsthand. I've been there multiple times this year. I've seen the record crowds at the Incheon airport, the record crowd in front of the leading university in South Korea. I've heard their voices. And I implore the United States people and the United States leadership to hear the voices of our closest ally in South Korea. If you won't do it for doing what is right and upholding human rights and freedom and democracy, which I believe our country still believes in, do it at least for American interests and US geopolitical strategic interests, because those are in grave risk as well. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Tan. The time left, what I'd like to do is to let the audience ask some questions. So could you just raise your hand, and you'll be given a microphone, and just say who you are, where you're from. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Hello. First of all, thank you for this remarkable panel. I especially appreciate Prime Minister Huang's powerful and clear remarks. My question is, what would you like to see the United States do?
Thank you. Well, directed first to Prime Minister Huang.
좋은 말씀, 좋은 질문에 대해서 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 대한민국은 지금 자유민주주의 대한민국을 지키기 위해서 총력을 다하고 있는 사람이 있는 반면에 그 반대로 대한민국을 공산국가로 만들기 위해서 애쓰는 이런 자들이 병존해 있습니다. 그런데 거기서 우리 자유민주주의를 지키겠다고 하는 세력들이 점점 힘이 약해지고 있습니다. 불법적 부정수모와 또 이것을 통해서 권력을 장악한 자들이 자기들 마음대로 대한민국을 요리하고 있습니다. 우리 법도 무너뜨리고 있고 또 시스템들 다 붕괴시킴으로써 민주주의 체제가 거의 무너졌다고 저는 봅니다. 법이 아니라 그저 독재에 의해서 처벌하고 또 재단하고 있습니다. 저도 그들과 싸우기 위해서 모든 노력을 다하다가 최근에 이제 창당까지 했는데 창당한 지 이틀 만에 압수수색을 했습니다. 정당에 대한 압수수색을 했습니다. 압수수색을 하려고 하면 압수수색할 증거가 있어야 되죠. 창당한 지 2일 만에 무슨 증거들이 나오겠습니까? 얼마나 무도한지를 알 수 있는 이런 예들입니다. 그리고 그 종교 탄압에 대해서 말씀하셨는데 그동안 좌파들도 또는 민주당 세력들도 전혀 손대지 않았던 것인데 지난 한 10여 년, 5년 정도 이후부터 이제 다른 세력들이 어느 정도 정리가 됐다고 보고 마지막 이 칼을 빼든 것입니다. 이것에 관해서 우리가 이길 방법은 너무 어렵고 힘들었었습니다. 첫째는 다 우리 뭉쳐서 싸워야 됩니다. 우파가 다 뭉쳐서 싸워야 됩니다. 그런데 우파가 그동안 너무 무기력했고 자기만 생각했습니다. 다치지 않기 위해서 그 편안한 길을 왔습니다. 이래가지고 싸움을 할 수가 없죠. 반드시 우파가 단결해서 이제는 자유대한민국을 지키기 위해서 싸워야 됩니다. 둘째는 우리 힘만으로는 부족하니까 우리 민주 동맹들과 함께 해야 됩니다. 가장 강력한 동맹은 미국입니다. 미국은 혈맹입니다. 세계적으로 피를 던져가면서 나라들을 지켜낸 동맹은 거의 없습니다. 대한민국은 정말 거의 수백만의 피해를 내면서 미국도 거의 30만 명 정도가 이제 전사를 하는 정도로 그 많은 피를 내는 그런 혈맹입니다. 그리고 그런 혈맹을 통해서 세계에서 가장 강한 나라로부터 세계가 부러워하는 이런 강국을 만들어냈는데 지금 이 나라를 지금 좌파들이 공산주의 세력들이 무너뜨리려고 하고 있습니다. 미국이 함께해야 됩니다. 지켜줘야 됩니다. 이것은 대한민국에 대한 혜택이기도 하고 또 미국과 함께함으로써 미국과 함께 행복한 미래를 만들어갈 수 있는 길이 되리라고 생각합니다. 여러 가지 말씀을 드릴 수 있지만 대안으로서는 그 두 가지. 그러나 우리 그 가운데서 우리 대한민국은 또 자기를 지키기 위한 그 노력을 하면서 최선을 다할 것입니다. 다행한 것은 최근에 젊은이들이 일어났습니다. 그동안 우리 힘이 되지 않았던 젊은이들이 일어났습니다. 그래서 대한민국이 그래도 길이 있다. 이런 상황을 전체적으로 보면서 우리는 우리대로, 미국은 미국대로 동맹을 지키기 위한 노력을 해 나가면 길이 있겠다. 저는 그렇게 보고 있습니다.
very much for your question, and I'd like to also thank our great panelists. Right now, Korea is undergoing a systematic war, and there are fighters fighting for democracy, and there are those who are also fighting for communism. So both camps exist in Korea. The issue is that those who are fighting for free democracy in Korea has become weaker because of the leftist power that has seized the government through election fraud, and they're currently manipulating all systems of Korea, all the legislations, the executive branches of Korea, thereby destroying the very core of Korean society. The government do not go by law, but because it is showing signs of dictatorship, punishing people without the law. For example, I established my new party. Within 2 days of establishing my party, the police came and seized and raided my offices. In order to raid a place, you need to have evidences, but it has been only 2 days since my party was established. How could there be any evidences that could be found? This just shows how ruthless the current regime is. Another prime example is the repression on religion, especially Christianity. Even in times past, it never in the history of modern Korea was a religion oppressed to this extent. I believe that this is because over the courses of their preparation, they are in the final stages of communizing South Korea. So this started from 5-10 years ago, and now as they're at the final stages, they have now resorted to also oppressing churches and pastors in Korea. In this backdrop, conservatives need to unite. We need to unite together. We should not be complacent and seek our self-interest or feel that we are vulnerable or be afraid. We need to unite together, rise together to fight together. And secondly, our allies, especially our strongest ally, the U.S. Our alliances has been forged in blood. No other alliances in the world has have been made through the shedding of blood. About 300,000 U.S. lives were sacrificed in the Korean War, and we are very thankful for it. And because of this sacrifice from the U.S., Korea was able to overcome its poverty and was able to become an economic powerhouse in the world. Now, I want to turn to the United States to help us. In Korea, we will keep on fighting and we will keep on trying at all fronts, but we do need the help from the United States because we are in our last resorts. Thankfully, these days, we see young people who have risen up. When I see young people who have fought to defend democracy, I could see that there is a path forward. And I'd like to urge the United States to fight this fight with Korea to protect Korean democracy and also for mutual interest and benefit for both countries. Thank you.
지금 한국에서는 지금 가짜 국회와 가짜 대통령을 무효라고 하는 선거 무효 소송이 2개가 제기되어 있습니다. 이 선거 무효 소송을 대법원에서 인용 판결을 내리면 가짜 국회가 없어질 수 있고 그리고 가짜 대통령이 당선 무효가 됩니다. 이것을 위해서 이제 대법관들이 재판을 지연하고 있고 아무도 하고 있지 않은데 이 대법원의 재판 지연행위나 그 잘못된 재판 진행에 대해서 미국에서 베네수엘라처럼 제재를 해준다면 수많은 증거들이 있기 때문에 그런 거에 대한 수많은 증거들이 있기 때문에 인용 판결을 내릴 수 있습니다. 그러면은 가짜 국회가 해산되고 가짜 대통령이 없어집니다. 이것이 피를 흘리지 않고 해결할 수 있는 가장 좋은 방법입니다. 그래서 우리가 이 사법 절차를 통해 가지고 이재명과 가짜 국회 친중파들을 내릴 수 있도록 하는 것이 가장 좋은 방법이니까 미국에서 그런 방향으로 유도할 수 있도록 그 잘못된 재판 진행하는 대법관이나 선관위 직원들에 대해서 제대로 조치해주면 제일 베스트한 방법으로 생각합니다.
So currently there are two lawsuits going on for the election nullifications. So right now there is a fake National Assembly and not fake president in South Korea. So for these two lawsuits regarding the election nullification process, I hope that the United States can intervene for the fair judgment and help and also restrict these judges so that South Korean judges can make a fair judgment to process these election nullification lawsuits. And I hope that the United States can also proceed with sanctions just like how it has done to the judges in Venezuela. So I hope that it can also impose sanctions against the improper proceedings with the Korean judges in the Supreme Court.
Okay, thank you all.
Hi there, my name is DJ. I have a question more about the practicality of what you guys are calling for. I'm a Cuban immigrant, but I'm a U.S. citizen, and when we look at Latin America, the policies that the U.S. has towards Latin America, I mean, they implement these policies because these countries are already taken over by communism. But like, for example, when you call for sanctions against the country you're trying to save, how, where do you find the balance to it not affecting the movement that you want? And how sure are you that what you're asking for the U.S. is going to do? Because I mean, even through the Trump administration, we've seen before, pleas from other nations to help, and it hasn't gone through. So where do you find that balance? Because like you said, this is more about prevention than, actually taking over the government itself.
That's a great question, and let me see if I can address what you're saying. Where sanctions can be more finely tuned are what are called secondary sanctions. Secondary sanctions are targeting specific individuals or specific entities within the country rather than having general sanctions against the country as a whole, right? So it's in secondary sanctions that there can be the surgical, targeted sanctions that are done. I'll give you an example. One of the ironies of some of these leftists who are in power in South Korea is that they're sending their children to the US for education. If there is a visa sanction, it applies not only to that individual but to their whole families. If that visa sanction happens, then the students who are studying in the US would not be able to study in the US anymore. They would have to go back to Korea. This could be done in a very targeted way. There is a lot. The thing is, the people who are opposing the US and are favoring China and North Korea, they used to be kind of circumspect in how they went about that. They used to try to hide what they were doing. Now they're coming out very blatantly. And so it's not even a difficult thing to figure out who's doing the anti-American sorts of things. And let me give an example along these lines. You have somebody who is been made the leader of the Democratic Party who tried to assassinate the US ambassador and his wife and to burn down the US embassy in Korea. Do you think he might be anti-American? Is there any question about that? This guy's the leader of the Democratic Party in South Korea right now. Should there not be sanctions against him, for example? And I could give many more examples, but that is one. And it's through secondary sanctions, which are targeted at individuals and individual entities, that can, in a very fine-tuned way, in a very surgical way, protect American interests and thereby protect the country of South Korea, our key ally, in a very targeted, specific way, if that helps.
Okay, thanks, Bart. I'd like to just, I'll get both. I'd like to squeeze both. And Bart, could you weigh in on that?
Sure. In addition to sanctions, there are also possibilities occasionally for some kind of criminal sanction when somebody has broken a law, a United States law. For example, a lot of the people that are engaged in these leftist activities are also engaged in money laundering. In the case of Venezuela, it's run rampant. They're united with the Cartel de los Soles. They're part of the narco-terrorism operation. It will probably not be long before there will be people related, working within the CCP, related to the currently ruling party, the Democratic Party in Korea, who will engage in similar activities. When they are, we should indict them in American courts and expose and seize the assets. That's the most important part. You freeze the assets and then you seize the assets and you take their money away, you take their power away. The other thing we can do in the United States is we can do what we're doing right here. We can talk about it and preach it and shout it from the rooftops. I want to read to you something written by a Soviet dissident. I can't remember her name, Elizaveta, I can't, but she wrote a book called A Mountain of Crumbs. And she said this, and I repeat this at least once a week. They lie to us. We know they're lying to us. They know that we know they're lying, but they keep on lying to us, and we keep pretending to believe them. That's their real victory, is when you pretend to believe them. That's the point of repression of freedom of speech. They're trying to make you pretend that you believe their lies. They know they are lies, and you cannot kneel. You cannot succumb. There are people here in this room who will be in jail, unfortunately, heaven forbid, but will probably be in jail in a few days, undergoing who knows what kind of difficulties. We cannot let that happen in silence. We have to keep bringing it up over and over, and if we're talking about it in Washington, they will be talking about it everywhere in the world. So that's the other thing we can do.
Jeff.
No, I just wanted to bring some Venezuela-related perspective. I think your question is a really important one, particularly in the case of Cuba. We've seen how the Cuban government points to the embargo as a way of blaming its economic mismanagement on an external threat. And we've seen that Cuban dissidents on the island make a point of distancing themselves from the embargo, even as they criticize the lack of democracy in Cuba. And in Venezuela, the Venezuelan opposition has been very smart. The Unitary Platform Coalition knows that poll after poll shows that economic sanctions, which impact the country as a whole, versus more targeted sanctions, like visa sanctions or others, are deeply unpopular. Economic sanctions in Venezuela, if you poll it, there's widespread rejection of broad sanctions, but there's interest in more specific pressure. And it's one reason why the Venezuelan opposition has really tried to stay away from being linked to the broader economic sanctions. I just think there's a recognition in Venezuela of how unpopular that is and how this affects the country as a whole. So I just think your question is a good one, and I think there are some parallels with the use of economic sanctions and the potential for backfiring against opposition actors in Cuba and Venezuela and elsewhere in the region. Thanks.
I have a question. On the Venezuelan side, because I am actually Venezuelan. So on the sanctions, it has been proven that actually the government usually relaxes his policies on the people when there are sanctions. That means the more sanctions, the more likely people inside Venezuela have an easier, and I say this quote unquote, life. But you spoke about the oil industry, and I wanted to know your take. Isn't it a little bit hypocritical that the U.S., through companies like Chevron, is still producing oil in Venezuela, taking into account that the Venezuelan government is not a normal government, it's a crime government, it's a crime structure of money laundering through the oil industry specifically. all of the drug trafficking, human trafficking. Now they are also persecuting people outside of Venezuela and killing them, like it happened in Chile with the Ojeda case. That without taking into account, or you don't have to go into the ecological issues with all the oil spills that nobody covers until it literally hits other Caribbean nations. Then people are like, oh, where is this oil coming from? And it's from Venezuela, because our oil industry is so damaged because of these governments. And then we still have companies, American companies like Chevron, producing oil, knowing that the Venezuelan government is the only, they say is the only one that gets positive anything results from this, because they have the chance to money launder, keep using the money from the West or from Western countries like the US. It also gives them sort of like a legitimacy as a government, although they are not the legal or legitimate government. So what are your takes on that?
Tom, just a quick answer, please.
I'll try to give a quick answer. I think that you raised a very valid point. And I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier, that I think we're in a unique environment in which President Trump is trying to refocus the way we think of foreign policy. And I think that's what explains the fact that President Trump sent his presidential envoy, Rick Grenell, to meet with Maduro in Caracas earlier this year. He negotiated just 2 months ago a prisoner swap with Venezuela. There's reports of ongoing communication between the administration and Venezuela. We see this deportation agreement that's ongoing. There's twice weekly flights that U.S. taxpayers are paying for, sending Venezuelans back to Venezuela. That wouldn't be possible if there wasn't communication between Washington and Caracas. And I think that really underscores that this is an administration that's not abandoning democracy and human rights, but they are talking about cold, hard U.S. interests. And I think there's been a recognition that from this administration that it's in the U.S. interest to preserve a Western footprint in Venezuela. I think the question is, how do these two dynamics talk to each other? How can we think of a carrot and stick dynamic in a way that actually favors a democratic transition rather than guarantee the status quo? So I think you're very right to point this out, and I think that's the question that all of us are struggling with, which is, how do we pair pressure with incentives in a way that actually finally breaks something free and gets Venezuela closer to democracy? Thanks.
Okay, we're just about out of time. Have you got a really quick question?
Short question.
Like really short and a short answer. Thank you.
It's really simple, a short question. For as a South Korean, I always think for United States, if you want peace, you need to prepare war. So my question is, include me and many South Koreans, they want to nuclear armament. So what U.S. government think about this, and what do you guys think about this?
So could you repeat, what was should South Korea have nuclear weapons? Was that the question?
I mean, include me, South, and many South Koreans, we want to get nuclear armament, safety tests.
Anyone care to take it on?
I'm against nuclear expansion. In any time I could stop it, I think it's such a dangerous weapon. South Korea probably has the technical ability to develop them. Many countries do. Having nuclear weapons is a trap. Kim Jong-un found that out. He thought, I have nuclear weapons and now everybody has to treat me with respect. President Trump said to him with one tweet, he said, I have a bigger button in my nose. And what he was saying is, if you ever dared, Kim Jong-un, if you ever dared to launch one of your weapons, you would be completely destroyed. Nobody would stop at anything to destroy you. Holding those weapons is a danger, and it's as much a danger to South Korea as it would be. It's a false promise of a strength.
Let me just add very quickly that South Korea is under the U.S. nuclear umbrella.
Yeah.
Right? So it's basically under the biggest, most powerful nuclear umbrella in the world.
Okay, thank you. I think we have to close this up. And Paul, I'm sorry I couldn't get you speak more. But Paul has an excellent book out called Democracies in Peril. I highly recommend it. Prime Minister, have you got something you'd like to say?
굉장히 중요한 말씀을 하셨는데 대한민국 평화를 원합니다. 전쟁을 원하지 않습니다. 핵을 사용을 안 하게 되길 원합니다. 그러나 북한은 계속 핵 고도를 추진하고 있지 않습니까? 근데 무방비로 이제 이렇게 하실 수가 없다. 걱정들을 많이 합니다. 대한민국 국민들이 많은 분들이 걱정을 합니다. 저는 그래서 그런 사태가 생기기 전에 정말 한미 동맹이 확실하게 같이 움직여서 미국이 우리 국민들에게도 확실하게 그 핵 문제에 대한 걱정 없다. 우리가 함께 하기만 하면 된다. 뭐 이런 것들이 메시지가 오게 되면 그러면 그런 문제, 서로 문제가 우파 진영 안에서는 다 해결이 된다. 이런 생각을 합니다.
Thank you for giving such an important remark. We want peace. We do not want war. We do not want to see nuclear development, but we do have concerns because North Korea is constantly developing its nuclear prowess. However, before such situation unfolds, I believe that if the alliance with the U.S. remains strong, and if the United States is able to take the first step in coming out with messages for us that we are together, that we have a strong alliance, then these concerns will die down, especially in the conservative rank in Korea.
Okay, we've had a most slight change of plan. Paul, could you take 2 minutes and tell the audience and everyone watching what you think they ought to know?
I would like to talk about Korea having self-defense systems regarding the nuclear weapons, and I would like to talk about it shortly. I want to say that South Korea is currently facing the actual threats of North Korea with the nuclear weapon. But just like Ambassador Tan stated, we know, South Korea knows that we are under the protection of the United States nuclear umbrella realm. So if the United States can 100% guarantee that there will be protection from the United States to South Korea, then I think the public opinion to have the nuclear weapons within South Korea will also die down. However, the important thing is, right now, when the influence of Chinese CCP party is growing, if the South Korea feels that we are not getting the protection of the United States, it will be inevitable for South Koreans to talk about the self-defense and also having nuclear weapons within its own country. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you all, everyone, for coming, and people who are going to watch this in the future. This is important, and it's necessary that people understand what is going on in South Korea. It needs to be more widely known. And I appreciate all the panelists who weighed in. Wish we had more time so that everyone could have said more. But it was all informative, and these are people who know what they're talking about. And particularly, it was very useful to learn more about Venezuela from an expert. As I say, you can see the comparisons, you can see the patterns, and you know what the risks is and what needs done. So once again, thank you all very much, and thank you to the Victims of Communism Memorial, which is one of the best museums in all of Washington. And I'm glad to appreciate the work that it does. So thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our event, and I would like to highly encourage all of you to visit the museum downstairs. We still have refreshments outside. Please enjoy them. Thank you very much for coming. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Always great to see you.
Another round of applause for the wonderful VOC staff.
My colleagues can't bring my wife this time. She's working on a dress.
Okay.
Baptism dress.
Sounds like she's also good.
She is unbelievable.
Wow.
Yeah. So, want to get a picture of it so I know. Thank you very much. I will see
I sent you a text message.
Okay.
Expect your reply.
Okay.
Yeah. From October 25.
Yeah.
Will you be there?
Where for what?
Washington, D.C. approved. We'll have a security conference on October 25th.
Okay. Let me look at it. And yeah, I have to figure out my schedule. I'm getting a lot of requests, so I have to figure out my